Friday, Kevin McCarthy and House Republicans unveiled their Commitment to America agenda just 6 weeks ahead of the midterms. We spoke exclusively with Marc, former Vice President, Chief of Staff and advisor, about the Republican strategy to break through in the final 45 days before the midterms, the fallout from Mar-a-Lago, and weak financial markets. Marc, thank you for speaking with CBS News. As we sit down today, we're in the middle of what appears to be a major sell-off on the markets. The S&P 500 is bumping up against losses of 24% now for the year, and the Dow 20%. What's the impact as we head into the final stretch for the midterms?
Well, Catherine, I think where we are in the economy is going to have a dramatic impact in November. I think markets are usually a leading indicator of where the economy is going. And I think we've had 2 consecutive negative GDP quarters, which is a traditional definition for recession. We're facing inflation that's at a 40-year high. Inflation impacts most those on fixed incomes, usually low and middle class Americans, who are by and large the majority of the voters across our country. And I think there's no doubt that in the last 2 years they've seen a significant downturn in their economic fortunes.
What's it been so far has in many respects it been a referendum on former President Donald Trump since the Mar-a-Lago search.
Well, I think you go back to the spring when there was talk of a huge red wave, and I think at that point the conversation was about the border and the economy. I think over the summer months that much of the news cycles were changed, and I think if they were talking about raids at Mar-a-Lago, it's to the detriment of Republicans. I think sometimes Republicans fed into that by wanting to jump on that story or putting out silly statements about when to defund the FBI, when our party has traditionally been the one that's wanted to make sure that the police are well funded. And so we need to make sure that our party sticks to those traditional messages on law enforcement. But if we're able to get it back to Bidenomics and what Biden's doing, not just in the economy, Catherine, but what the situation is at the border and what the situation is of crime in our inner cities, then Republicans will prevail in November.
Since we spoke in July and as an advisor to former Vice President Mike Pence, is he closer to a decision on 2024?
Catherine, I think that right now his focus is going to be traveling the country and trying to make sure that conservatives win election, whether or not that's in the House, the Senate, or in governor's offices. And that's what you see him.
Is he going to focus on some specific races or states the last 6 weeks?
I think he's going to be traveling all over the country these last 45 days. And I think that he has been for the last few weeks. And I think that in predominance, he's going to be doing a lot of House races and governor's races. And I think that that's where his focus is going to be. And I think, again, at some point next year, he'll figure out where he thinks that he's being called to serve next. And if that's the case, that he feels that's where he's being called, then I think he'll make an announcement at that time. But right now, his focus is on the midterm election cycle.
So the timing is not right after November, but probably early next year?
I don't think there is a specific timetable for it, Catherine, to be honest with you. But I don't think it's before this midterm. I think right now he's focused on helping other candidates win.
You did say next year, though. That's why I'm asking.
Fair enough.
Does the former vice president support the abortion legislation that's been tabled by Senator Graham?
The vice president has always been a pro-life advocate. It's important to him. He has been a champion of those efforts when he was a member in the House. As you know, he authored legislation that would have denied taxpayer funding to Planned Parenthood. It's a central tenet of who he is. And I think that he believes that our party should always stand for life, that the Republican Party should be the party that is advocating for the most innocent and to protect them and not to have a culture of death in America. And so he's in favor of pretty much all efforts across the country at both the state and the federal level to advocate a pro-life agenda.
Former President Trump told Fox, quote, if you're the president of the United States, you can declassify it just by saying it's declassified, even by thinking about it. Is that your understanding?
That's absurd, obviously, and I think it would make it very difficult for the intelligence community to have a classification system if that was the case.
So you and the former vice president didn't operate on that standard?
Of course not.
Is this an environment in which the Republicans can break through on these issues?
Oh, absolutely. I think that Republicans will break through. I think that it's going to be a significant victory for Republicans in 45 days. I think that there's no doubt that it's important for us to also lay out what our vision is. And that's why I think it was good for Kevin McCarthy and House Republicans to put forward a vision today to say, if you elect us, here's what we will do to help change the situation at the border. Here's what we'll do to help change, the trajectory of our economy right now. And so I think that it's absolutely something the Republicans are going to be breaking through.
I'm just going to ask you about that plan. It's called the Commitment to America.
Right.
What about the timing? we've just got a 6-week run-up now to the midterms. Is this the right time to lay out that roadmap?
Well, I think if you go back a few months ago, Vice President Pence, through Advancing American Freedom, laid out a larger freedom agenda because he said where there is no vision, the people perish. And it's important that we not just be opposed to something, but we say what we're for. And I think that is very important. As far as the timing, Catherine, I think if you go back to 1994 and the contract with America, it was roughly in September that was laid out. So I think that it's perfectly appropriate where Americans are more focused post-Labor Day to do that.
When we spoke in July, you said it was a risky precedent for the January 6th committee to seek testimony from former Vice President Mike Pence. Where does that stand?
Well, I don't think there's been much change in what we view as a concern there. I think there is a clear separation of powers that House committees can do investigations frequently. But I think if they're subpoenaing vice presidents to give testimony, I think that'll create a dramatic change in the future of what a president views as far as the counsel he or she receives from a vice president of the United States.
So, to be clear, the former vice president has not provided testimony or records to the January 6th committee.
Well, I think that the committee subpoenaed records that belong to the office of the vice president, and those were cleared through the National Archives. So there's been no resistance to the transparency of that, and those documents were handed over.
On January 6th, you and then Vice President Pence were forced to retreat to a secure area in the Capitol. This House bill to reform the Electoral Count Act that's been tabled by Congresswomen Lofgren and Cheney, does it make that fix? Does it go far enough?
You know, I think that there's actually pieces of it that shouldn't be rejected out of hand, as I think some Republicans have. I'm encouraged the legislation actually acknowledges that the role of the vice president is crystal clear. It was laid out in the 12th Amendment to the Constitution. It's specific in the Electoral Count Act that his job is to open and count the ballots that have been certified. And that's exactly what Vice President Pence did.
Our latest CBS polling projects the Republicans taking about a dozen seats in the House and the Democrats hold the Senate. What's your prediction?
I think that the Republicans will do far better than that in the House. I think the reality is that Americans are frustrated, and ultimately they'll be voting against Bidenomics. They'll be voting against what's the catastrophe at our border, and they'll be looking to make their communities more safe. I think the Senate's a little bit more difficult because I think the map this time favored Democrats as far as which members were up for re-election. So I think that you'll probably come somewhat closer to status quo in the Senate. But I also think you're going to pick up new state houses for Republicans in governor's races across the country. So I think it's going to be a significant victory for Republicans this November.
How many do you think?
I think it'll be a couple, but keep in mind, Catherine, we already have a number that's significantly higher than Democrats. And so if we get up to 30 out of the 50, I think that'll be a successful night. Catherine, thanks for having me.
Thanks very much, Marc, for speaking with us again.
Good to see you.